Okay. So I just want to read Jason's words. Jason sent.
I read it somewhere. It's,
Jason quoted this from somewhere.
yes.
All right, here it is. Shmot. In the words of the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it's been. Is that also quoted somewhere, Jason?
No, that was my one.
That was Jason. By the way, Jason is a master of music. And so when he chooses the Grateful Dead's "What a Long, Strange Trip It's Been," he had a lot of things to choose from. This was very purposeful. In the beginning of Shmos, we served an evil tyrant who fancied himself a god. By the end, we served the real God. By the end, there we go. In the beginning, we worked against our will to build cities for an evil purpose. By the end, we willingly gave of ourselves to build a home for Hashem to dwell amongst us. In the beginning, we worked without stopping. By the end, Hashem has mandated Shabbat so we could rest. In the beginning, our work was called avodah, from eved, slave. By the end, our work was called milacha, the same word used in Bereshis to describe Hashem's creation of the world. We move from perverted work designed by Pharaoh to destroy God's people, to divinely mandated work to lift us up. Could have been read better, but you get the point. And thank you, Jason, for sending that. Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot that went on in this one book, I think.
Yeah. The Ramban calls this book Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. We've talked about how the 5 books, we call them Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, based on the first words or one of the first words in each one of the books. But originally, they had other names. There was Sefer HaYashar, Sefer HaGeula, Torah's Kohanim, Sefer HaYashar, the Book of the Straight, Sefer HaGeula, the Book of Redemption, Vayikra is Torah's Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim. Bamidbar was Pekudim, which is numbers. That's how they got numbers. And Devarim was Mishnah Torah, like a kind of review of Torah. For some reason, at some point, they switched from that. And I'm not sure why, because the Gemara itself uses these terms when it talks about them. So anyways, the Ramban talks about this book as a book of redemption. We start in exile, and we make our way towards redemption. And the redemption is in this week's parsha at the very end, when the Mishkan is set up and God's divine presence resting in the Mishkan, resting amongst the people who are surrounding the Mishkan. So that, when we say redemption, that's what we mean. We move from exile into close relationship with God, with God's divine presence resting amongst us. It's interesting because it doesn't even say that we have to be in the land of Israel to have this kind of redemption. We're still in the desert with a mishkan, a traveling kind of tabernacle, but we're not in Eretz Yisrael, which is sort of interesting that you can have this kind of redemption and not be in Israel. But this model of exile and redemption is a model that is repeated over and over and over throughout the Torah. First of all, you have exile with Adam and Eve, who are exiled from the garden. You have a kind of exile that happens to Cain, where he again has to wander Then you have a kind of exile with Noah, because he's going to, again, leave a place where he was, and he's going to be sent out. You have exile at the Tower of Babel, because you have the people scattered at that time. And then you have Avram, who's told to leave his father's house. These are not, I'm not saying they're the same exile. I'm just saying this notion of exile, of leaving
Sent out.
the place where you are. Abraham is told, that he should leave, and he has to leave where he was from. And then Abraham ends up in places like Egypt and amongst the Philistines at different times because of droughts, or the Philistines was something of his own choice, I guess, but he's sort of an exile. And then you have Yitzchak ends up in the land of he doesn't really have exile. He has a little bit. He goes to the land of the Philistines, but he doesn't really, he never leaves Israel. Then you have Yaakov. Yaakov goes into exile to Lavan. Then Yosef goes into exile to Egypt. Then the whole family goes in exile to Egypt. So this notion of exile is a notion that is repeated over and over and over. You could say, in some sense, birth is a kind of exile, because the child has to first leave the mother. There is a return to the mother's embrace, but the child has to sort of leave the mother first, right? In order, and even says in marriage, in the beginning, it says, Al Kain Yazov, that a person should leave as aviv es imo, he should leave his parents and cleave to his wife. So there's a kind of leaving that's even that happens in marriage. Again, this does not imply that every exile is bad. Some of them are punishments. Some of them seem to be a necessary part of development. So there's a kind of rhythm that you see in the Torah where there's like a kind of separation and then a coming back together, a separation and a coming back together, a separation and a coming back together. And this is a part of the rhythm of creation. And it's expressed in, as we talked about, in almost every aspect of our lives, and in every aspect of our history. It's one of the, at first, ironies of marriage. It says, in that line, it says, a person should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife as one flesh. He should cleave to his wife as one flesh. So he should become one with his wife. But the Midrash suggests that originally Adam was made up of both male and female. And so that creation, or the creation that's being described in this second chapter, the creation, which is the creation of Chava out of the side of Adam, is really a separation. That there were two aspects to the original human being, and it is being divided into him and her. And so it's sort of ironic that man and woman were one, then they are separated so that they can once again become one. So you have a oneness, you have a separation, and then you have oneness again. But you could say that this is a huge part of life. In fact, even the Gemara, when it's talking about, I think it was a Gemara in Sanhedrin somewhere. There's a Gemara that says that the way it was set up is like a piece of Adam is removed, a part of Adam is removed, and then he has to search for this other part, and then they become united. So there's an element in some of these of a search. So again, with that's how it's characterized in the Gemara. that after the separation, it's like the male is searching for a lost part of himself, and that's how we originally meet. How we originally become whole is that there's some sense that I'm missing something, and then when I see this person, or when circumstances allow for it, I realize I found something that I lost.
Singles clubs.
Right. In Jerry Maguire, that couple in the elevator
Right,
who were
exactly.
signing in sign language, "You complete me." So there's some sense of being incomplete, and that motivates a search for completeness. Again, it's not in every one of those that I mentioned, that every one of those exiles, do they necessarily have an obvious searching before there's a resolution, but this is also a quality that is often there. So again, you have like exile, you have something that is away from where it's supposed to be. And then you have a yearning from the side of the one who's exiled, and then maybe in a searching from the other side.
Yeah.
So a good example of this would be Dina. Like Dina is captured and taken away, and then her brothers go out to retrieve her, and this is seen in sort of deep discussions of this kind of thing, where there's something's in exile. In this case, Dina is in exile, and then there's someone who goes out to get her, to capture her. I tonight
Rescue her.
to rescue her, to sort of rescue her. There's a story, the first story in Reb Nachman's collections of stories. Reb Nachman had many stories that he used to tell his students. Mostly at the end of his life, he decided that he was gonna really make a serious attempt at crafting stories that would waken up his students. That's what he said, that he wanted to transmit in a way that they would feel awake. And so there's a collection of these stories. They were originally spoken in Yiddish. His disciple, Reb Nosson, translated them into Hebrew and published them. And so these are a collection of like the most well-known and impactful of those stories, but he had many stories. So the first of the stories is called The Lost Princess, the daughter of the king, the lost daughter of the king. And the story is that there was this king, he had 6 sons and a daughter, and he loved this daughter and he would spend time with her, and then something happened, he got upset with her, and he uttered something like, "May you be taken by the one who is no good." And then she goes to bed that night, and the next morning they can't find her. She has been kidnapped
By the one who's no good.
the one who's no good. And so there is somebody who is second to the king. He's called Mishnah Lamelech, or Shane Malchus. He's the second to the king, the viceroy, who I just figured out. I don't know why today of all days, but it struck me today. Roi is king, a ruler, a vice
Yes.
king. The viceroy is the vice king.
There you
Viceroy. There you go. So he takes it upon himself to go find this princess. He is concerned for the well-being of the king and the princess, so he's going to find her. And he goes off on a journey with a servant and a horse and something else, which I don't remember right now. And he goes looking for her, and he has to go into the realm of no good. in the evil English translation, he translates it as evil, but Rav Nachman calls it lo tov, the world of no good. And the story is about that search, and it's many understand it to be talking about that the lost princess is the Shekhinah, God's divine presence, which also, God's divine presence, and that the Shekhinah, the God's divine presence, is in exile, and you need to search for her, and then help her escape from the forces of evil, of lo tov, of not good, and then bring her back to unite her with the king. So this story, obviously, he has lots of carefully crafted details in the story that are meant to teach very specific things, but it's his first story, and it seems to be about this subject of exile and then return. There are, in fact, Aryeh Kaplan points out there's a lot of similarities between the story of Dinah and this lost princess. In the story, the king has 6 sons and then a daughter. Leah had 6 sons and then a daughter. So Yaakov with Leah, 6 sons and then a daughter. She is taken by forces that are not good. And then, she is redeemed by the children who go in there to redeem her. But again, you could see how this story is just being told over and over and over and over, ostensibly because this is part of a rhythm in our life that is repeated over and over and over. Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, is about this subject, according to many, that the 2 lovers, the woman is the divine presence, and she is sort of exiled, longing for her husband, and that it's a metaphor for God and the Shekhinah, the separation between God and the Shekhinah, God and the divine presence. You see them unite for a moment, separate, unite for a moment and separate, but for the most part, they are separated. Esther, Megillus Esther. Esther is taken by Achashverosh. We don't always see that as a terrible thing. There are many people who celebrate the fact that Esther was a queen, but if you think about it, it wasn't a good circumstance, and it was in the midst of darkness for the Jewish people, or let's say right before everybody was aware of the dark, but it was in exile anyways. It's in exile. And then eventually we are made to understand that after the Purim story, eventually things start in motion, and there's going to be the return to Eretz Yisrael and the rebuilding of the temple. There's even last week in Daf Yomi, we're studying Moed Katan, and there are about 4 pages or 5 pages in Moed Katan in the middle of the tractate that are the deepest of the deep. They're about Merkava, the study of Merkava, the chariot vision, and the study of the first days of creation, which are the deepest of the deep. And then they go into they mention the 4 who entered the Pardes, and they talk about Acher, Elisha ben Avuya. And I was thinking about this subject while we were doing it. Now, Acher is one of the 4 who entered the Pardes, the orchard, and he becomes a heretic for some reason. His specific heresy, there's discussion about it in the Gemara, but he does not believe. One of the consequences of his experience in going into the Pardes is he does not believe that he's going to have a chance at repentance. He's like cast out. He doesn't believe he's going to have a chance at repentance. And so, and Rebbe Meir is constantly trying to ask him, return, return, return. So you have Acher, you have Elisha ben Avuya, who is being cast out. He's being told, that he's not going to be able to return. He's like, the actual phrase is shuvu vanim shovavim, return my recalcitrant sons, except for Acher. So it's a kind of like casting out. He's like sort of cast out. And Rabbi Meir is trying to get him to return, and he's telling Rabbi Meir, I can't return. So after he dies, Rabbi Meir decides he is going to still redeem him in the afterlife. But in order to redeem Elisha ben Avuya, first Elisha ben Avuya, the problem was Elisha ben Avuya is not allowed anywhere. He's not allowed into what you would call the fires of Gehenna, which we understand not literally, but he's not allowed there, and he's not allowed in the next world. So he's in a kind of limbo. And so Rabbi Meir figures, at least let him go to get punished for whatever he's done, and then he'll be able to go into the next world. So, and he said, you'll be able to tell if I was successful because smoke will come out of the grave of Elisha ben Avuya. And after Rabbi Meir died, smoke came out of the grave of Elisha ben Avuya. By the way, I've said this many times. If there's anybody out there who is interested in working on this, Rabbi Meir, the stories of Rabbi Meir are rife for a play or for a series of plays. I don't know why the Greeks missed out on writing one about his life, and for sure don't know why Shakespeare mixed out on it, but it was obvious to give somebody now an opportunity to write, because his life is just, wow, there were so many awesome. He's married to Bruria. His father-in-law was one of the 10 martyrs. He was the chief student of one of the 10 martyrs. Actually, I think 2 of the martyrs he was student, but he was the chief student of Rebbe Akiva. And his relationship with Elisha ben Avuya, with Acher, he was very close to him. So there's just so much there. Plus he was absolutely brilliant, and he's responsible for most of the language in the Mishnah. He's just hugely impactful. He's got all this stuff going on. But anyways, so there's smoke does come up out of the grave of Elisha ben Avuya. Rabbi Yochanan, who was first generation Amora in Israel, and one of the really very impactful scholars as well, he said, it's not enough just to get him into Gehenna. You got to get him out of Gehenna and get him back. So he said he's going to try to work on that. And so it says, this is the Gemara talking. The Gemara says, after he dies, he goes into Gehenna, or he reaches into Gehenna, or he goes into Gehenna and pulls him up by the hand, and nothing from Gehenna could stop him. And I'm reading that story and I'm going, that is the story. Again, he's exiled. They're searching for him. They're bringing him back. And it's this story, even something, at first glance, it seems so different. Even that principle, which I mentioned to you a couple of weeks, which I talk to you about almost every week, which is Aviva Zornberg's notion that she set aside, but I'm still cleaving to, which is the notion that the book of Ruth is about how loving kindness seeks out suffering, the object of suffering. And that in a sense, you could say Naomi, the book could have easily been called the Book of Naomi. If you read the story of Ruth, you ask, that's one of the main questions about the story. Why is it called the Book of Ruth? It's Naomi is really the character that seems to be moving the narrative. Ruth is there. I'm not saying she would get Best Supporting Actress, but it'd be question if she gets Best Actress, because Naomi seems to be the real main protagonist. She's the one who seems to drive the narrative. She starts in tragedy. Her sons die, her husband died, and she's barely hanging on. And then you have Ruth, who just is indefatigable. She just sticks by her side. She won't go away. She's trying to leave. She's saying, go away. Her other daughter-in-law, Orpah, left. Anybody would have left in this circumstance, but Ruth refuses to let go. And she just sticks by her side. Wherever you go, I'm going. And eventually she nourishes her and nurtures her and brings Naomi back to life, so that the end of Ruth, the book of Ruth, is Naomi has had a child, and she breastfeeds. She's not only come to life, but she's like a giver of life again. So this is a kind of redemption that happens. And so if you look at Ruth, Ruth is like this force that just is like searching for her, holding on to her, and bringing her back into life as Naomi sort of slips off. It even starts with them in exile. They go off to the lands of Moab. They're like in exile. And Ruth is the one who sort of brings her back. At one point, Boaz says to Ruth, he calls her an Ashes Chayil. It's the only place besides the actual mention of Ashes Chayil in Mishlei, in Proverbs, the only place in Tanakh that uses this phrase. She's an Ashes Chayil. And Ashes Chayil means like, valor doesn't mean, it's a misunderstanding, as Rabbi Foreman points out. Valor doesn't just mean good. Valor doesn't mean great. Valor doesn't mean you're on the cover of People magazine as the best woman that ever lived. That's not what valor means. Valor means that you put yourself at risk for the sake of another, that your life is devoted to others. A soldier who shows valor on the battlefield is the example. It's chayil, like chayal. It's like this is what. So she is like in devotion to the other. She puts herself at risk in devotion to other, which is what this force does. This force that seeks out the force that seeks out the reunification. It's one of the great mysteries. Why is it that part of the process of getting married involves going into the unknown? You're like dating is you're beginning a relationship with somebody and you don't know. It's unknown. You don't know. You have to guess. You sense, but you can't always trust your senses, because sometimes somebody's in love and the other one's not in love, or you sense that this is the person that you're supposed to, that is the person of your dreams, but does the other person think that you're the person of their dreams? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And you're never sure. Even
That's why it's scary.
It's scary, but you go like into this place of unknown, and especially, for whoever was the one who popped the question, as much as you're trying to be sure that the other person is going to say yes, you're not sure. You have to like put yourself out there into some kind of vulnerable place. It's not a safe place. It's not safe. The searching for your spouse is not safe. You go into some dangerous place. In the story of the princess in Rav Nachman, like he sees the guards around the palace, and he's assuming she's in that palace. There's something that says to him she's in that palace, but he sees the guards around there, and he's going, how am I going to get in? And then at one point he just says, I'm just going to go. And he goes in, and they leave him untouched. But there's like that moment where you just have to sort of go in. You have to make yourself vulnerable, and you have to go in.
Just act like you know what you're going to do.
Exactly. He went in with confidence, and
Right.
He looks like he knows what he's going to do. But on the inside, we know it's not. Like, why does it have to be that way to get married? Why does it have to be that you have to go into this place of the unknown and be vulnerable and in order to, but this is in this narrative of reclaiming what is lost, of finding what is lost. In this narrative, this is how it has to be, that you go into a place that's unsafe. In Hashem praises the Jewish people. Ko amar Hashem, Matzachem bamidbar. So there's a song that we sing that it's based on, I think it's Yirmiyahu. It's a line from Yirmiyahu, that God praises Israel because we're willing to go into the desert. We were willing to go into the desert, a land that, again, it's not sand desert. It's a wilderness. Yes, right.
Yeah.
In order to sort of reconnect with Him, we have to go into a place Where's our food coming from? Where's the water coming from? How are we going to protect ourselves? It's complete unknown. And this is one of the great praises of the Jewish people by God. It's one of the historically greatest praises that has ever been said about the Jewish people, is that original moment where we're willing to trust and we'll make ourselves vulnerable in order to go out into the desert. And this is the Geula, this is the story of the vulnerability. There's all sorts of stories in this book, and the Jewish people get criticized, and deservingly, perhaps for things that have happened during this time, but it is dwarfed. Everything we did is dwarfed by the original willingness of the Jewish people to even go into the desert to follow this through. You may think to yourself, well, of course they did, because their life was miserable. Nobody leaves because their life is miserable. It's very rare for entire people to leave because their life is miserable, and especially if there weren't models for it. Yet it's very rare. It doesn't happen. Your life has to be more than miserable for you to go out. And once you go out, right, what the kind of result, the success of it, right, which is in these cases is measured in unification. That the goal of it is a sense of unification, and we leave Egypt, we go, we expose ourselves, we are vulnerable, right? But then that leads to what is redemption at the end, and unification. God's divine presence rests in the Jewish people, that this is a kind of necessary process. It's necessary along the way. Risks must be taken. In the story of the lost princess, or in the story of Dinah in Shechem, there, different people are going out. It's not always the same, whatever's searching for it. In the case of Ruth, it's chesed. It's loving kindness that's searching for. They're not all exactly the same story, but those elements are there. Something is exiled, something is away, and there is this push. There is this movement towards reunification. It's a reliable move. This was the part that Aviva Zornberg was moving away from, that it's reliable, that when you're suffering, there is this force that is going to come for you. But this is the story. Even in Job, he as he's speaking of suffering, he's speaking amongst his best friends. They came, they came for this discussion, and eventually God comes, as part of the discussion over there. The answers aren't, the questions are not all answered, but you see the unification, you see the coming together, and that there are forces that are built into creation for this very purpose. We are born into a world. We have no idea what's going on.
Nope.
No.
Not a clue.
We don't have any idea what's going on. And it's a Kafkaesque story. It was just you sort of show up somewhere, and it's not clear what the rules are, what's going on, or whatever. You have some people who hover around you, who are telling you things, and maybe they know what they're talking about, and maybe they don't. And as your time goes on, you see it's sort of a mixture. They know a little bit. They don't know a lot. That's for sure. They certainly do not know a lot, because if you ask any question that's not in the handbook, they don't know what to say. But so they don't know a lot, and what they know is sometimes right, and it's sometimes not right. That is what you're born into this world, right? So what chance do we have? What chance do we have?
We're doomed.
I mean, just talking about like the individual person who's sort of growing up and flowering. One of the ways of dealing with it is to not deal with it, is just to ignore the fact that we were born into a place where we don't know what the rules are and what's going on, and not too many people around us seem to really know a lot about it. But we could sort of ignore it, which is what a lot of people do, and they just sort of busy themselves with what we do know and hanging around the stuff that
Doing what we need to do.
Right. But every once in a while you get woken up to the fact that that nobody knows what's going on, and I don't know what's going on, and why am I here, and what is here, and all those kind of questions. Again, there's people talk about it, but you sense, I sense, I think we all sense that whoever's talking about it doesn't even really know that much. We don't really know that much about it, but there is this, and there is this expectation that we will recognize that we come from somewhere else, that a vague sense that there is somewhere else, and that somewhere else is looking for me. Maybe that's the sound that comes from Sinai, asking the people to return. Maybe that's that line, Shuvu Banim, return. There's some sense, there's some distant voice that we can almost hear that seems to indicate, even though we can't necessarily remember it, but there's something,
Trying to guide us.
there's something that's calling out to us, some indication that we're a part of something
Bigger,
grander,
much bigger.
but that we're in some kind of exile in a certain way. Again, this has nothing to do with whether we misbehaved. This is just, it's just, again, part of the rhythm of life but if we're like on a real quiet moment and we recognizing that we came into this world with no real understanding of what's going on or where we are and why we're here.
That's why we have parents. They're supposed to.
I know, but
explain
parents are good, parents are great, but they don't know that much. You don't know that. If you ask one question that's outside,
this.
it's almost like an artificial, let's say you had like a computer game, you could, as long as you play within the parameters of the game, there's all sorts of stuff to do. If you try to do anything that's outside what the game's programmed for, there's nothing there. And it's like, if as long as you ask questions within this box, there's tons to say. There's a billion libraries waiting for you, to ask those questions. The questions that have been asked over and over and over, and people have had the gift of finding some answers. That stuff, as long as you talk about that stuff over and over and over, you're good to go. And as long as you repeat things that have done before, and you stay within this certain box, spend your whole life doing it. But if you try to go outside that box, you notice, and that box is like this, and then there's the rest of the universe. And then if you ask anything outside that box, nobody knows. Nobody knows. We don't know very much. The parents for sure don't know very much. Our wise men don't know very much. Ramosha Shapiro, at one point, he was quoted, my friend Rabbi Nissel quoted him as saying one time, who's a great man, who's one of the great people of generation? Somebody who realizes he doesn't know very much. Who would be the greatest person in a generation? Is somebody who realizes he doesn't know anything. Because compared to what there's out there, but it's okay. In other words, we're not alone. And so, and there's a lot, there's a lot to do, But again, if you reach out there, but let's say you're out there for a moment, you're out there in that place, the sort of quiet. If you could quietly go outside the box for a minute, those moments, which do happen, there's some sense that I come from somewhere else, and that the source of where I come from is looking for me or calling to me.
Wants you to come back.
Right. And in that way, we're the princess. In that way, in this story, we are the Jewish people who call out, but then again, someone is sent, and then the source speaks to the people, and the source reunites with the people. We found ourselves in Egypt, and in this terrible place, and we're trying to figure out, why are we here? What do we do? And what is the meaning of it? And it's not always suffering. There's a lot of, this place it's not all about suffering, the not knowing. But there's times when we wake up and we're just going like, why? And there's this voice and this sense of it. And this is these teachings are, yes. This is the case. And we know this. And just knowing that we know this is so huge. These stories of Rav Nachman, like I have friends who, they are so important to them because they are in places in their lives where they feel so alone. And Breslov has become an important way for them to find a connection back to the source of what was lost. These are like, they aren't necessarily, maybe there are in these the keys to how to return, but at least the story suggests that you're right. And there is this unification that eventually will happen, and at least the knowing of that, that's the case, and the recognition of that is perhaps what is so important about Mashiach, the notion of Mashiach, why it is so important in our lives, because it is an affirmation of this, not just an affirmation of it, but a kind of path to the reunification that we're looking for, that we sense is supposed to happen. Mashiach is not about the person. Mashiach is about the reunification, the sense of reconnection with Hashem. Right, and me in my kind of existential loneliness, that there's, yes, that there is a kind of reconnection in our Shmona Esrei. We have Es Tzemach David. We it's a kind of Mashiach focused blessing, and in Nusach Sfarad it says Mitzapim Yeshua, that we are longing for salvation. We are longing for salvation. It doesn't just mean that you build longing. It means you recognize longing. You acknowledge the longing. You recognize it, and you don't stand in the way of it. That longing, that yearning is holy, and it is a kind of guarantee of the reunification that will happen. It's one of the questions that you're asked after you die, according to the Talmud. Tzipisa Yeshua, did you long for salvation? Did you long for salvation?
I'll remember to say yes.
Yes, say yes. So, but also that, that, and I was talking to Akiva Tatz a couple of years ago. Akiva Tatz came to speak. I think it was for Or Sameach. He came to speak, and I went and I schmoozed with him a little bit before the lecture, and he said, he told me about a friend that we know who had cancer. The friend had cancer, and he spoke to Moshe Shapiro, blessed memory, and he asked Moshe Shapiro, what should my avoda be? What should my service be while I have in this condition, in this circumstance, knowing that I'm probably going to die soon? What should my service be? So Moshe says, you need to add a second story to your building of longing for salvation. And oftentimes he would say that, like, many people, he would say, like, many people would assume that the most important blessing is that blessing in the Amida, where we talk about longing for salvation. The thing is, you don't have to actually create the longing. The longing is sort of naturally there, this sense of being out of place and being from somewhere else, and sort of hearing it, and recognizing that the reason you feel out of place, and that the strangeness and the darkness and the other kinds of things that go on, is because you really are out of place. You are out of place, and that there are forces waiting, looking for you. They're looking for you, and in order to bring you back into connection with the being who is your source. When you recognize it, when you open yourself for it, when you don't stand in the way of it, you don't block it, then it has its own. It's like its beacon. E.T. go home. It's like it's a little the beacon, a sense that of how to sort of find its way back. Shuvu banim shovavim, return, my recalcitrant sons. That there is a kind of sense within us of at least the longing, which ignites the maybe forces that might be needed to help us get back. And that is that. I say we meet again next week and talk about this or some other subject. Thank you very much.